Welcome everyone to the Poor Proles Almanac. I know I say every interview that we have a special episode, but this week is particularly unique. Through a confluence of events, I was connected with one of the elders of the tree crops world, Bob Seip, and was invited to his farm buried in rural Pennsylvania. Bob, or Robert, depending on how you know him, has seen a lot at 94, and after walking around the property buried in a foot of snow, it became clear he didn't feel remotely finished yet. We gathered around his kitchen table surrounded by recording equipment and dogs and bowls of cracked hickories and butternuts outside of cell phone service, talking about 70 years of farming and memories of his contemporaries and the trees that covered his landscape. Upon arriving, Zach Elfers, a prior guest on the podcast, shared his own stories of Bob. Robert's daughter, Emily Swackhammer, and her husband, Scott, joined us under the cocktail tree, a tree next to the home with countless grafts, some of which may be cultivars thought to have been lost. For everything Robert has forgotten, his wife Cindy is there to remember and candidly chimes in between making sure that everyone is fed. There's nothing quite like a conversation around a kitchen table about the things we are passionate about. This was a joy to share, and I'm incredibly indebted to the Seip family, as well as Zach and Carissa, for sharing the moment with me. Of course, no good deed can go unpunished as it goes, and after trekking off-road as the sun set to view some of the oldest planted trees on the property, my phone went missing and was only found by flashlight later. Further, despite bringing backup recording gear, because of course when it's the worst possible time for something to go wrong it will, we still managed to have some audio issues. The most prominent issues are at the beginning of the episode, so please make it through the first few moments, and I promise it does get better, and it's worth listening to. I'm incredibly honored to share this moment with you. We talk about the history of John Hershey in the area, and the role of biodynamics in the development of tree crops in the region, and so much more. These are the types of conversations that need to be happening to keep us from losing our past and, in effect, allow us more tools to shape our future. I hope you all enjoy this episode, and I hope it inspires you to get talking. Bob, thanks so much for inviting me into your home. You know, your family's showing me around your property and all of the great trees that you've got.
Oh, pleasure to do that. Anyone that's interested, anyway.
Yeah, it's a beautiful property. It's the middle of winter as we're recording, so there's fresh 4 or 5 inches of snow on the ground. So we're not getting to harvest anything off the ground, but, we get to see the trees and surrounded by people that know the landscape better than I could ever imagine. The amount of varieties that you have, the greenhouses, all the things that have been growing here for decades. It's really inspiring for somebody on the other end who's just starting to plant a lot of stuff, and it's hard to sometimes see what it can be in the future, right? You put the stick in the ground, and then there's one 10 feet away, and it just looks like 2 sticks in a field. But someday it does turn into this. It's easy to forget that, or it can be really difficult to see that. So seeing what you've done here is fantastic and really inspiring.
I do. My interest isn't just the nut trees. I get involved in conifers that should be used more, like the Atlantic white cedars and the cypress that people thought they were only a coastal tree, but they grow pretty much in wet or dry ground, but they're very, very good plant for in wet ground because of the root system. They hold the soil back.
Yeah, bald cypress.
Yeah, I saw there's a couple over there, right?
And you have two kinds of bald cypress.
No, really, I don't know 2 kinds
You
of
have the pond bald cypress?
I don't know if they're I believe they're probably the same, but I'm not positive. Well, I just rethought that, but there's 2 species of the cypress.
Okay.
The one is the pond cypress, and it's just a smaller version of it.
So tell me a little bit about this farm. How did you end up here on this piece of land, and what made you want to be here?
Well, my parents bought this place when I was just probably about 5 years old or 6 years old. I don't know exactly, but it was a junkyard from an outfit from Allentown, and everything was decrepit and falling down, and the junkyard started right at the front door. You step out the door, and you'd be standing in glass from smashed cars and debris like that. And so we picked up truckloads of things like that and went out repairing things where they had been. And somewhere along the line, I met a lot of people, and there were a couple of people around it. I had really a background interest in trees and plants, and met people like that, and made the most of it, I guess.
Won't you tell me how you got your first cow for the school program? That was a funny, interesting story.
The first ciphers, I can't think.
First cow.
Oh, the first cow. Oh,
Through a school program, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had a vocational agriculture course in high school, and there was I don't know, but through that I got a female cow, or calf, so I raised this animal and bought more to it, and got involved with the cows too. Not only trees, but cows.
You grew a whole herd from that animal.
So when you were in high school, that was the 40s, late 40s, early 50s?
Graduated in 1948.
1948.
Boyertown High School.
Okay.
Vocational agriculture.
You were graduating just as agriculture was changing a lot, right? People, like after World War II, a lot of things were changing around agriculture. So I'm sure that must have kind of impacted what you wanted to do as somebody trying to farm.
I was interested in making the farm more productive and doing different plants that might work out here, and do a lot of experimenting like that.
What drew you into the tree crop side of things, to grow hickories and chestnuts?
No, because the farm originally the acreage was close to half out and was forested.
So were there already trees? Were there already like hickory trees here?
Oh yes, just the only shagbark. There were no native shellbarks around here that I knew of. I don't know where their area is specifically, but they weren't common around here.
Okay. So I know Zach had mentioned that there are some butternuts here as well, right?
There's a what?
Butternuts?
Yes, that was a native plant that grew around. When we bought this farm, it hadn't been farmed for 20 or 30 years previously, and that's one of the trees that maybe the birds or squirrels carried seeds around and planted them around the place.
So you planted some butternuts, right? Or was it Zach? Was it up on the hill over here?
Yeah. A few of them got named, but not, it wasn't popular like a hickory tree.
Are those pure butternuts, or do you not know?
Are they what?
Are pure American butternuts, or are they crosses?
Yeah, sure it is.
And they're resistant to, or they seem to be resistant to blight if they're still alive.
As far as I know, I don't know that anybody has been troubled with the blight of the butternut. I don't know anything about that.
On our farm, we really haven't seen a lot of that.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
So we have seedling butternuts coming up in the woodrows.
Oh, that's awesome.
So maybe we're just escaping it for now.
Maybe, or we've got some really good genetics or something. That's awesome. Awesome.
Did you collect wild nuts when you were a boy and eat them?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Do you remember anything about that? What did you use them for, or how hard were they to crack out?
Well, even my stepfather was interested, and we soon got favorite trees. You soon learned which ones crack out reasonably well, and you concentrate on those and try and give them more space and anything to help them along.
Do you remember where any of those favorite trees were?
Well, one of our favorite was right across the road from Lowell's house. There was a shagbark hickory there that got really nice nuts. They were well filled, and I think they should have been named. However, around that time, the road got widened and the tree had got cut down. And I hadn't made any I hadn't propagated the tree, so we just lost that one.
You're pretty well known for grafting, right? So
Yes.
where did you learn to graft?
Oh, when I was probably about roughly 12 years old, I had a friend that was my stepfather's father.
Was it Pappy Kemp?
Yeah, and through him I learned other people that he knew that were interested in nut trees, like Peter Bachtel back there.
And did he teach you to graft?
I don't know who taught me originally to graft anymore. I don't know who it is. Could have been. I don't know. Don't remember. I had contact with different people that did that kind of thing, and I don't know who taught me that.
But you had a lot of practice.
Yeah.
So how many trees do you think you've grafted in your lifetime?
I used to get 300 understock every year for a couple of years, 5 or 10 years, and I'd graft that many every year.
So I found one of your price lists from when you ran the Grafted Tree Nursery from spring of 1987. And so you had shagbark hickory, you have different cultivars here, shellbark, northern pecan, heartnut, and so on. So you were selling about 300 grafted trees per year.
They didn't all take, I don't, probably maybe 100, it's hardly even half. I don't really know that.
So I remember, Robert, there was a professor that was sending students to you. Was that Rick Ray from Del Val that was sending you students to learn your grafting techniques? I think it was, wasn't it? How did you meet Rick Ray? Because he used to send students up here, and the students would be down in your greenhouse, and you'd be teaching them your grafting technique. Because your double veneer graft is kind of unique. I don't know other people that use that technique. And the way I remember that story was maybe Rick Ray was here visiting, and Robert was telling him how many of his grafts percentage-wise took. And Rick Ray was saying, oh, that's not possible. We only have like 10%, not 90%. And Robert said, no, I had 100 understock and 10 of them died, so that's 90%. And when Rick Ray went to the greenhouse and saw his technique, which has a veneer cut on the top and the bottom that support the graft, he just started sending students here to learn Robert's technique because it was pretty clearly a good one. And I don't know how many years that lasted, but I do remember seeing a lot of students down there at Robert's grafting bench.
Well, that's awesome. That's really cool. I've never heard of that method. So,
well, I don't know where it came from. It's, as far as I wondered if that was a technique that was taught to him. Yeah. Because everyone else is using their special crafting knives, and Robert's using a Barlow knife that he got at Weaver's hardware store and getting 90%. But anyway.
That's awesome.
So I remember in the spring, you'd take the overwintered trees, and you usually had about 5 in a pot, in a nursery pot. And I know that because I held them as you dumped all the soil over my hands to bury their roots when they were being put in the pots. And I remember you would dump them out, and then you would package them, and you had everything in the back porch. You had cardboard boxes, lots of packing tape, and I remember this assembly line of packaging of trees, and they were shipped out, and I've always wondered, where did those trees go?
Well, the most
a lot of
famous
places.
ones went to the Chicago Botanic Garden, and they are big trees now. They send us pictures of them.
Oh, wow.
And they're big trees planted around a pond. And the Chicago Botanic Garden isn't in Chicago, it's in Glen Cove, but it's still called the Chicago Botanic Garden. And the trees are on an island there, and they send us really good pictures of them. And they're big, beautiful trees with a plaque on them that says, grafted by Robert Seip.
All right.
So the other people, though, that contacted you to buy trees, I remember this, that you'd get letters in the mail. This was before anybody had a website or Facebook.
We shipped them all over.
How did they find you? Where did these people find out about you?
I'm not sure. Maybe through the Nut Growers Association. I don't know that we had an actual ad in there. But somehow they found out about us, and we were shipping out a lot of trees. All April, that was our time to ship trees. And we bought boxes that we could fit them in and put them in boxes and ship them out.
So you told me once upon a time that when you were a kid, Mountain Bummy, who was a local herbalist and healer, and he bought pelts and had a bookstore, that he taught you a lot of the local native plants. Do you remember anything about that?
Well, I went with him. He was always looking for helpers to hunt the plants in the woods, and he specifically hunted golden seal and ginseng that I know of.
How did you meet Mountain Bummy?
Well, probably another one of my things I did, we have a stream down here with muskrats and minks, and every year I'd catch a group of these things and take them down there, he'd buy them for the pellets.
Oh, so that's how you met Mountain Bummy, from selling pelts, which is kind of ironic because your daughter, not everyone knows, used to run a trap line, used to sell her pelts to
It's another hazard of growing up on this farm.
She'd come in the morning and say, "There's an animal in my trap. Come down, Mom, and take it out for me."
It wasn't my thing.
Right. As far as I know, I only talked to Mountain Bummy a couple of times. When you had that big Dandelion Days Festival weekend here, I think he set up a booth on the porch over at the general store in the village. And I remember sitting on that porch talking to him, and I talked to him over here in the parking lot a few times and such too. Mm-hmm. Do you remember any of the other edible plants that he showed you? Because I know you were raised by a single mom, and there was like some food insecurity back in the day. Do you remember any of the other plants that were around, or did he just show you nut trees and such?
He mainly, to collect wild things, he was mostly interested in ginseng.
I see.
But I think through him, I think he also introduced me to golden seal, which is commonly known as an endangered plant right now. Well, golden seal is easy to grow, and I had several plantings of them. And one time the right-of-way went through and destroyed them all, and I don't know what the second time that they all got almost all destroyed, and I still have one plant growing that I'm sure of. And every time I get a bed, they're easy to grow. They grow in shady, watering soil, and it's used worldwide, and it's an endangered plant.
One of my first memories of you was shortly after I met your daughter in 1985. We came back here, and you needed help planting golden seal back out in the woods. Mm-hmm. And I helped you, all afternoon planting golden seal. And you had told me that, when you were a kid, there were whole hillsides covered with golden seal, and that it really bothered you that it had been harvested locally to near extinction. Yeah. And I remember also, we were planting golden seal pretty far away, and I'd mentioned that I didn't know your property went this far, and you'd said, "Oh, I don't think we're still on my property anymore," which I thought was really impressive, that you were just planting golden seal back out for the benefit of the environment and not necessarily just trying to make your property better. That was probably in 1985 or 86.
Did you know where we planted that?
I do. I remember it was probably up on this side of the hill, but it was all the way down almost to where Sivanis' junkyard is. Mm-hmm. We planted this whole side down through here and then up in the cutoff, which was probably Benfield property at the time.
I lost track of that planting.
So you're saying
might still be there flourishing.
He was one of the original guerrilla gardeners.
That's it, exactly. Well, that's it. That's what we were doing. Do you remember the turkey oak? I don't remember what variety, like what type of oak. I remember you planting turkey oak up on top of the hill that was known for a prolific mast crop, and you were planting that just so that the wildlife would have more mast crop.
I think I lost track of that. I don't know what that was.
I remember planting it up off of the woods trail somewhere up on the top up there. I remember clearly calling it a turkey oak.
Turkey oak was being grown by John Hershey. So really, a bunch of those in his nursery. I'm not sure why he was growing it, but it's a Mediterranean species, Quercus ceres.
Oh, well, maybe that explains why it's not there anymore. We planted quite a few things as experiments around here that are no longer here.
Yeah, I see a note on elderberry, which I didn't see. Well, we didn't talk about it. I'm sure it's out there. Once it's there, it's kind of hard to get rid of.
Yeah.
So are you doing improvements on elderberry, or you just...
Some disease hit them and wiped out 99% of them.
Okay.
Don't know if we have hybrids left from that, or if I have some from another source. I still have elderberries around here, but they're not the true wild ones that we had. The meadows were covered with them.
Can you tell us what the land was like as you remember it from when you were a child?
Well, everything was different. Like the meadows down here was covered with brush. And I know I tackled it. My first thing when I graduated in 12th grade, I bought a big pruning shears, and I thought I'd go and cut them down with this, and I cut some down. But I think what worked better was we put fence around and had cattle in there, and they pretty much took care of that.
You told me a story once about how there may have been some rocks up on top of the hill, and it's related to why you named the farm Lenny Lee.
What was that again?
The Indian rocks.
Indian rocks.
Yeah, so Zach wants to know how you came up with the name Lenny Lee for the farm.
I actually came up with the name Lenni Lee because the Indians camped in our meadow right down here behind the stream, which is the northwest branch of the Perkiomen Creek. And they camped there, and some of them worked at the furnace, which was right down the road. The man who had the furnace wanted to be buried in the Indian graveyard on top of the hill because they were all his friends. They all worked for him. So there's an Indian graveyard up on top of the hill. And because of the Indian, and because they found a lot of arrowheads on this property, we have a large collection, in fact, of arrowheads and banner stones and tomahawks from Indians that were here. And we know they camped right here along the creek, and they were friendly Indians. And so they were the Lenni Lenape Indians. And the first part of the farm name comes from that, Lenni, and the Lee part means a meadow. A Lee, L-E-A, is a meadow. So it means Indian meadow, although you should say Native American meadow. But that's where the farm name came from, and it came from the Native Americans who camped right here behind the house.
They lived right here exactly where you live. In fact, our son Clay found his first arrowhead when he was about 5, and he found it right here where the rain coming off the roof of the house washes the stones clean, and he found it literally under the eave of the house right here. So, yeah, this is
perfect arrowhead.
He came in with his arrowhead, and he's 5 years old. Yep, that's an arrowhead.
He still has it, I hope.
We still have it, yeah. I saw it the other day.
Obviously, you've got a lot of trees here that are, tree crop from like nuts and things like that. Do any of them have any relation to what John Hershey was doing not too far from here?
I've seen on some of your maps that you have a persimmon that you have marked Hershey number 5.
Yeah.
And I've seen some other references to Hershey on your maps. He has hand-drawn maps that span, some time, and they're not all to scale. It's a little hard to interpret some of them, but I think you have a persimmon anyway.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So do you have any of your trees, your nut trees, grafted from scion wood that you got at the Hershey nursery?
I don't remember that.
You brought up persimmons. We've talked about nuts for a while. You've got quite a few persimmons here too. Are they all native? Are they native and Asian, or are they hybrids?
Both kinds. I think I had the Asians died out one after the other because they're not fully hardy. Got some up to 15, 20 foot and or one crop, and then got cold winter, and that wiped out the Asians.
That was only 5 or 7 years ago, though, that the Asian went away. I mean, Robert used to say that the big Asian persimmons went with dairy products. He loved them with yogurt and with milk, and they were really good that way. And he had them growing all along Stonewall, right in the back part of the farm over here. And we had grown a couple at our house, too. And ours were just starting to bear when they all froze one winter. So they were marginally hardy. They grew for 15 years, and then they all died.
So where are we, 6A? Is that what, depending what...
They just changed it.
Yeah.
So
that's why I was looking at them.
6B.
Yeah.
Because I've got some Asian persimmons, and they're holding up, but I'm 7A now.
Yeah.
I wonder if they cross with the native ones.
I don't know. I think they do.
They do cross with the native ones. That's something that Jerry Lehman in Indiana was doing a lot with. And then there was also a guy in Alabama. His name's escaping me at the moment. Oh, and also in Ukraine and Eastern Europe and Russia, there's been a lot of breeding. Like Nikita's Gift is a well-known one. Cassandra.
That's a cross.
Yeah, there's like Sosnovskaya. Cliff England's a grower down in Kentucky who has a whole repository of all kinds of persimmons, especially the hybrids and things like that.
If they were available, I'd try anything like that again, but I don't know where you get one.
Do you remember the name of your friend in East Germany that you used to trade plants with during the Cold War? How did you meet that guy?
Dr. Jurgen Reagan, I corresponded with him, and I don't know, he had a botanical garden or something in East Germany, and he got seeds and plants from around the world, shared many things with me, like big walnut trees that came from Japan, and I don't know what all.
I remember that being one of the cases where I really learned the value of Latin names of plants, because even though he was from East Germany, the Latin name was the Latin name of these plants, and they could correspond. Did you correspond with him in German, in High German?
No, English.
In English, okay, I wasn't sure. And do you want to tell them how you finally figured out how you could get plants through quarantine? Do you remember?
No, I don't.
Everything used to always die in quarantine, getting shipped back and forth from East Germany. But Robert and his friend figured out that they were overwhelmed with mail at Christmas time. And so they would just rubber stamp some stuff through because of the volume of mail. So they used to trade all their plants at Christmas time. And some of the stuff was good and some wasn't. I think that's where you got that fragrant epaulette tree. And I had that growing at my place that I got it from you. And I couldn't find it in Michael Durr's Guide to Woody Landscape Plants. And it turns out that I think the U.S. National Arboretum had only just recently got one. And Robert had them on the sales lot here, which was kind of funny. But I ended up cutting mine down because although it grew great, I saw it starting to come up in places where it shouldn't have been. And I was afraid that I was going to be that guy, you know. So I cut them all down. But it was a cool, fragrant epaulette tree. I don't remember the Latin name. It doesn't sound familiar. So I'm thinking Heptacodium. What's that? That's different, though. No, that's different. I don't remember exactly what the name of that plant was, but I could probably still find one or two, unfortunately.
I think some of the trees you got from your friend in East Germany are over on the hillside where you have the American chestnuts that you planted. And you said they're heart nuts. They're seedling heart nuts. And you said Japanese walnut.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's some pretty big trees over there from that.
You have a pawpaw variety called Prima, and you said that came from Germany, right?
I don't think I have a pawpaw.
It's right over by your little propagation greenhouse.
Maybe I do. I don't know.
I've heard him.
It's a big fruit.
Talk about one that's from Germany. It's right behind that greenhouse. Yeah. So you're pretty well known for the persimmons, especially this one row you have right along the main road. Everybody that knows persimmons knows that you have a great row there. And I even have seen the school bus with kids in the bus driver pull over and pick persimmons off your trees on his route and then pull out again.
Fast food.
Yeah.
So I think you also had a beer distillery or beer brewery that picked persimmons and made a persimmon brew from some of your persimmons. Do you remember who that was?
Carolyn Ryder brought a woman here that was a friend of hers, and they would come every year and pick them. And the woman's son was making beer, persimmon beer. And I don't remember, you said about them picking them off the trees. You can't pick them off the trees. They're going to pucker you.
Right.
Well, the bus driver did that. I saw him do it.
Well, I'm sure the kid
You regretted it after.
they pucker you
Poor
up.
kids will never eat another persimmon.
But the trees out here, the first one is a Miller, and the last one is a Garrettson. I don't remember the other. There's two in the middle.
Early Golden are the two big ones.
Early Golden. Okay, and this one down here at the pasture is John Rick.
Yeah, Garrettson.
Oh, that's a Garrettson. There was a John Rick. There were two there. I guess the John Rick died. And Garrettson is still there. That one's late. That one's really late.
When you were a boy, were there good wild persimmons to be found? No.
So what brought you around to persimmons then?
Apparently not. Didn't like them. I don't know why.
So why did you want to grow persimmons? What made you change your mind?
I like fruit, and I still to this day I like them. You know, to me it's a treat to put maybe 2 or 3 or something like that persimmons and mash them up, put sugar on them and cereal, and that's a great dish in the morning for me.
I often think, in an era before sugar was readily available, how Native Americans that lived here, how they would have looked forward to pawpaws and persimmons. Can you imagine, when it got to be that time of year? I just think that would have been... Especially persimmons, like December after you've been eating nuts for 3 months. Exactly. Yeah. And that must have really been a wonderful time of year. Well, it still is.
Now, you also have some chestnuts, Chinese and American, and you also remember before the blight had fully wiped everything out around here. I know Zach had told me a bit about some of your memories of when you were a kid, seeing the ghost forest of the chestnut.
We always had a couple of sprouting out American chestnuts in the area, but maybe I had occasional nut from them. I can't remember the names of them, but there's just 3 or 4 different cultivars of Chinese chestnuts.
So, Robert, when you were a boy, you told me once that you remember hiking around and seeing forests full of old dead chestnuts that were still here. Was that with Floyd or was that with Willard? Who were you hiking around with?
Well, yes, when I was... that's clear in my mind yet, but I was about, 3 or 4 foot tall, but my stepfather, and we were out at his parents' place, and he took me across the road there. It's lined with maple trees, and we stood in line in maple trees and looked down to the woods, which was 1,000 foot or so from there. And if you looked in the woods there, the understory, maybe 10, from the distance, it was just maybe up to 10 or 12 feet or something like that. But it was full American chestnuts, and they had all collapsed from being dead from the blight, and they bleached white. They looked like bones in the woods.
So I remember you telling me one time about when all the eels down here died, and then that was when the Kawiki Chemical in Valley was dumping all the pollution up on the hill in the mine holes. Do you remember what year that would have been?
That's what I thought could have been the problem.
I think Robert called the EPA because all the eels all of a sudden died in the creek, and it turns out there was a chemical company that was in Valley that was using an industrial solvent, and then they were driving up and dumping it in the mine holes, the iron ore mine holes up on the hill. That's a super fun site now.
Yeah.
But I remember Robert telling me once upon a time that, one day all the eels just floated to this hop and they all died. And I mean, the eels are a barometer of pretty fresh water. You don't have those in freshwater creeks, and this is absolutely the headwaters of the West Branch of the Perkiomen. So.
In my research, I've come across the name Perkiomen and trying to understand what that means in the Lenape language, and I'm pretty sure it means the place where we go to crush hickory nuts.
Oh, wow.
Seems appropriate. So, who were some of the folks that you were hanging out with back in the day, like when you joined the Nut Growers? I know you knew Miles Knoll and Tucker Hill and
Earl Trexler.
The Coble family.
Earl
Trexler.
He was a member, I guess, of the Nut Growers.
Al McGee.
Jay Book.
Yeah, Jay
Yeah.
Book.
Was there anyone that you were looking at whose farm or trees kind of inspired you or like kind of guided you as you were trying to get these trees in the ground?
Well, at that time already, if there was something I was really interested in, I'd know the people well enough that I could get cuttings and I'd graft them.
Yeah. Was there anyone that you would like go to their farm and say like, this is what I want to do, or this is what I want it to look like, or was it just your own vision based on your interest in these trees?
Well, it's just something that had my interest, I guess, and most young people have a different interest, and these people, most people that have these, also they were very quite influential people, and they knew what they were talking about, and I appreciated their input.
You received a lot of signed wood material from George Wells, didn't you?
One of the best trees we have, which is a butternut, which won first prize at the farm show, we took our kids one time to Lost River Caverns in Hellertown. And there was a big tree growing right there by the caverns. And of course, anytime Robert saw a big tree when he was younger, he had to get a couple cuttings while nobody was looking. He brought it home and he named it Lost River Butternut. And that won first prize, best of show at the farm show last year.
Buckley.
No, Buckley won last year. This year, Lost River won for
So that tree's still standing?
butternut. Yeah, that's up on the side of the hill. It's a smaller nut, but it fills better than some of the named cultivars that we have, at least this year it did. And it cracks out decently well.
So, Robert, what made you decide to sell your dairy herd and concentrate full-time on growing plants and nursery stock? Because your timing was really good. Do you remember how you came to that decision?
No, I don't.
Well, I think we were tired of crawling under cows, and everybody else was getting new milking systems, double 8 herringbone collars and everything, and we were still crawling under cows. And I said to him, isn't there anything you would rather do than milk cows? And he said, I always wanted to have a nursery. I always wanted to have plants. And so we started, we sold the herd, I guess, but we kept all the young stock. And we always had some cows milking here, and we always had milk. Even when you got married, we were still milking some cows. So we always had our own milk. And finally we got down to where we didn't have any milk anymore. We would trade one fresh dairy cow for 6 or 8 calves to the neighbors, and we get bull calves. We started getting bull calves. And then when we didn't have any milk anymore, that was a tragedy, because now we keep running out of milk.
Well, I remember when I first met Emily, she was still shaking milk containers. But you used to sell raw milk off of your porch.
We sold a lot of raw milk. It was the hippie era, and all the hippies wanted back to nature things, and they were all eating all kinds of weeds and all kinds of stuff, and raw milk.
Yeah.
And so I had the refrigerator on the porch. I would fill it twice a day.
But didn't you have to have a sign that said it was for pet use only, since it wasn't pasteurized?
I didn't have a sign like that, but there was really not a law against selling raw milk at that time, and I don't know if there is one now. But it's a little dangerous, because, if somebody would get underland fever or something, they could sue you. So we finally decided to stop selling the raw milk.
So Bob Rodale, one of the early organic researchers, farm isn't very far from here. Mm-hmm. And I think that brought a lot of people to this area, pretty rural area, that were macrobiotic diets and, kind of culturally enlightened. And,
a lot of vegetarian.
Right, a lot of vegetarian. So Emily, as a little girl, used to babysit for some of the communes up here on the hill. And I think those are some funny memories. But Robert and Cindy got to know all the local hippies because they were selling raw milk off of their porch. So
I remember they were growing some interesting things in their gardens. I remember we were in Seasaltsville, and we were at a party with one of the groups of people we call hippies, and they took you into their backyard to show you their marijuana plant. Do you remember that?
We all tried it.
Ooh, well, now the plot thickens. That's part of the story I was unaware
of. We were teenagers, I think, at the time, and the kids knew what that was, and we were like, "Oh, Dad's looking at marijuana. That's a big scandal."
And Robert's like, "This is a beautiful plant." Anyway,
now, did you pay a lot of attention to the permanent agriculture movement as it continued to grow, like the Land Quarterly magazine or like Russell Lord, any of those folks that were still talking about it in the 50s?
I don't think so.
Okay. No, but I can tell you that they've made a bunch of environmental improvements on the farm. They have 2 settling basins that I helped build that catch all of the barnyard runoff, and then it all runs into a settling basin that you can clean up periodically with the loader. And then that water is piped, after the sediment settles out, all the water off of the top runs down under the road. And then down here where Robert used to have all of his daylilies, which is something else we haven't talked about, there's a long lateral pipe with perforations in it that disperse that water over a great long distance, so that it's not all running in to the west branch of the Perkiomen Creek. Not to mention, early on, the cattle had access to any place they wanted to drink. And now they have a much better riparian buffer on both sides of the stream, and only one place that the cows can actually get into the stream to drink, and it has a solid bottom on it. So they've made some really good environmental improvements here.
Like terraces, so you put in water terraces and strips contours in to stop erosion.
Actually, that was one of the first things that you did when you started farming, was build all the terraces and the underwater diversions, and when you were clearing the rocks out of the fields and all.
I think in my memory, he was always interested in the research that he could access. So again, this was, back in the day when you couldn't have all the access we have to things now. Always subscribed to periodicals like Lancaster Farming, some of the other farm journals, and also had conversations with the people that were from Rodale. We had a lot of environmentally minded people around us all the time. But I think he synthesized all of that into a practical approach. So what was going to work on this farm for this family, and he never worked off the farm. So he had to make enough money to support what he was doing and his family here and feed us. So I think he did have some outside influence, but a lot of it came from within. That's my recollection of it unfolding.
Hey, we're taking a quick break in the episode to remind you that you can get a whole lot more information from poorproles.com. On our website, we have access to our supplemental reader for the podcast, which provides more depth and context, as well as thorough citations for all of the stuff we talk about in the show. You can also sign up for our newsletter, which updates you about limited releases, such as various nursery stock that we sometimes sell through the Poor Proles website, as well as updates about new merch that we have. You can also support the show through that website, poorproles.com, where you have access to our Patreon and our Substack to get early releases for articles and episodes. Now, if you enjoy the show and are just looking for even more audio content, go check out Tomorrow Today, which just wrapped up season 1, or tune into the Gastropocene, which is a project of myself and Dr. Aisha Khan to discuss the way our diets have driven the Anthropocene and what it looks like to use our diets for good. Now, back to the show. What are your thoughts now, looking back at all of the trees you've planted? What trees you have the most hope for or are most excited for in the future?
Well, I've planted just about everything that of importance, that to me at least, that grow in this area. And we have some native, almost native things like the chemicibers from the pine barrens that built Philadelphia, but it's hardly used anymore. But it's a tree that grows in weather dry ground and different timber trees like that. It is what I was especially interested in.
Why don't you tell them why you're so fond of the bald cypress?
Yeah, bald cypress, another one.
That's one I've heard Robert talk about a lot. It's got lumber value. It grows well. He has one planted, you can see it right from the road out here, that probably has cypress knees that stick up above the water this high, and people don't think of it as a Pennsylvania native tree, but it used to grow all the way up into Michigan before the last ice age, so it grows perfectly fine around here, perfectly winter hardy. That one out there is probably at least 40 years old.
They were excavating the Philadelphia subway system, maybe even in New York City. They found a bunch of old, big, bald cypress stumps that had just
They didn't rot.
been in the muck for back to the last ice age, really.
There was a story written about that. I don't know what book anymore, but some book on stories like that about trees. But another one in Philadelphia, and when they were building the train track or something, they had to go where the cypress tree was. And then they mentioned that they had a crew of, I don't know how many people working for how many weeks to dig through this.
And it's really rot-resistant wood, so it's what they use in the mushroom industry. For the mushroom houses, it's all cypress wood. I know the side of your barn is cypress wood. The doors, maybe all the siding.
Yeah, well, for more than one reason. One reason, they don't give off a flavor or an odor. And the other one, it's one of the most rot-resistant woods.
And you tell a story about how cypress is superior to willow for doing stream bank restorations and stream bank plantings and things like that. Because
well, if just by observation, if you drive the roads, you see where there's a lot of willows, and they're all, the stream is here, and they're all bent that way or this way. They fall to a 45-degree angle because the stream undercut them. And well, that don't happen to a cypress tree. The cypress tree makes a buttress of something and can be in the middle of the river, and it stays there.
I remember when you were first interested in cypress, and you got a whole bunch of seedlings from some nursery and had them shipped here. And then you enlisted the kids to take these seedlings. We had buckets, and we had our seedlings in the buckets, and we had to climb through the woods over here on this side and the swamp. And we all had a digging stick, and that was our job, to put all these little cypress seedlings into the swamp here. And I think some of them are still there. I don't know how many of them actually grew.
Two species out there. There's pond cypress and dististicum.
I think you had a pretty good work crew for a few years there with 4 kids.
Yeah.
So the pond cypress is from up by the Great Lakes, and then the other one, the dististicum, is coastal plain to the south.
Native up to Canada, the southern part of Canada, and it originated in the Great Lakes area.
So how did you find out that they could grow here?
How did I find out what?
That the cypress could grow around here?
Yeah, there's on the road from Boyertown up to Yellow House, I don't know the route number, but when you go up there about a mile on the other side of this side of Boyertown, there's 3 along the road there, and the other side of the road is a police building that is just for the use of the police. But there's a stream there, and that person that has that land apparently put 3 or 4 cypress trees there, and they're probably about 2 foot in diameter right now.
When he saw those trees down there, it's 562, I guess, he realized they had seeds. And he climbed down the bank, collected seeds,
That's where the biggest one.
and grew his trees from them.
I planted that from a seed
So
that I cut down there.
how many plants in your nursery came from seeds that you just collected from around the area?
Yeah.
Most of it?
I may have bought seed of some things, but anything I could collect around here, I would.
Robert's always been really observant. I don't know how he keeps his eyes on the road, but he often gives directions, not just to me, but complete strangers by trees. And even if you ask him how to get to Quarryville in southern Lancaster County, he'll be describing, well, you drive down this road until you see this big walnut, and then you turn left at the walnut. And he's the only person that I know that has ever used trees as landmarks when driving directions to
I always thought
complete
that
strangers.
was funny, too. When we'd go anywhere, there would be a big red barn, and I'd say, you turn at the big red barn. But he would say, you turn at the walnut tree.
Right.
He saw the tree, I saw the
Right.
barn.
And so, you might think you planted something that's unusual in the back corner of your property, but if Robert's driving down the road, he might see that tree too and come ask you if you could collect seeds from it.
Now, I saw in the greenhouse you have some Kentucky coffee beans. Were those from this farm or are those from someplace
They are
else?
from this farm. So,
So how did...
Lenny.
So could you talk a little bit about the Kentucky coffee tree?
I don't think he planted them. I planted them.
Yeah, I think
So why did you plant?
there's a
somebody gave
feedlot up there, and for some reason there was a bank there, and I needed trees to put on there, and for some reason I put some Kentucky coffee tree there.
So you were holding the bank,
Yeah.
the soil in the bank, and
Seemed like a good tree.
every little corner of this farm that you couldn't grow field crops on was potential for planting a tree. And
We
Yeah.
used to have thousands of the cedars, junipers. There were like 20 acres back on the hill that it's too hard to get there to farm, and it's surrounded by deer, so I gave it up. But there were thousands of these junipers growing in there, and we used them for many Christmas trees and fence posts. And the deer have wiped them out. There's not one there anymore.
Well, or a succession. I think a lot of them got shaded out. But Emily, as a kid, all your Christmas trees were always cedar trees and, like super Charlie Brown like Christmas trees. And those are all like Emily's fond memories of Christmas as a kid. It was always with a cedar tree as a Christmas tree.
yeah, that's what I think a Christmas tree should look like.
Right?
I think it might be interesting to note that when our children were young, we couldn't take them very far away on vacations because we had to be back in time to milk. But we did take them to the Morris Arboretum a lot, and well, I wouldn't say a lot, but sometimes, and to Longwood Gardens and places like that. But every time we came home from a place like that, Robert had seeds in his pocket.
It just fell into his pocket.
I think the last couple of years he got more interested in evergreen trees. And he has, like right out here at the side of the house, what are those two trees that you're proud of right here along the house? They're real stickery things along the side of the house. There's two trees there.
The Florida Yew.
Oh,
Can't remember the name of them either.
everybody knows about the tree. I can't think of the name, but it's almost extinct in Florida.
Torreya.
What?
Toria.
Toria.
Toria,
Yes,
yeah.
that's what it is.
I have
Toria.
three species of them down there. Toria, Florida, Torium nucifera, and third one, I don't know what it is. But they grew well around here. However, I cheated on the Toria Florida. I grafted it on a different species because it's the root that gets the fungus.
Oh, okay. Would that be Phytophthora?
Phytophthora.
Probably.
So do you remember getting a cutting from a weeping Toria on a visit to maybe Delaware Valley College?
Well, I had permission to from one of the arboretums down there to get cuttings, and also at the Arboretum up in Jamaica. What is the one up there?
The Arnold Arboretum.
Arnold
We were at the Arnold
But I
Arboretum.
had a short course, and they allowed you to take cuttings, and I'd bring.
Last year or the year before, you showed me a spikenard plant that you have. I think it's out there underneath the cocktail hickory tree. Spikenard. It's an Aurelia racemosa, and you said it has really beautiful foliage in the fall. It turns orange and red like a maple.
And what the way you can tell it changes from green to a golden yellow in the fall, and you see it from 100 yards.
It gets this great big flowering spike. Very beautiful.
The ones around here are just around and bushy growing.
Okay.
And I never saw any beyond maybe 4 or 5 foot or so.
Well, you had told me that you had visited John Hershey's nursery in the 80s. This was, I guess, maybe when it was being developed, because you told me there was a shagbark hickory there that you really loved, and you don't know what variety it was, but there was a big flat stone right underneath the tree, and it was sort of up on a hill, and you could just go and crack the nuts right on that stone under the tree, and you said it was the best hickory you'd ever seen.
Don't recall.
You remember that? He forgets a lot. It's 94.
Do you remember the Reichert mulberry?
Yes.
That's his favorite thing to talk about.
I can't believe that it's not more popular. There's nothing like it. That bear bore fruits so prodigiously that they were black. And one time I was down at the Hershey nursery down there, and he had mulberries in his barnyard. And amongst them, you could pick it out which was the Reichert one by the mulberries. The ground was just covered with these big, juicy mulberries, maybe 2 inches long and 5/8 inch thick. And they may be extinct. And there's nothing like it.
They probably cut that one down to build the road. They put a road through there or something.
You said it used to grow over there by the garage up the road?
It was named after him. That was Earl Reichert's garage.
Yeah. Oh, that's where it came from.
Where it came from.
Quarter mile from here. When I was a kid, I'd walk over there and always get a handful of these mulberries.
And then it ended up in Hershey's catalog.
I never had the Hershey catalog.
Well, I remember seeing Reichert in his catalog.
No, all I want is some cuttings. They're easy to root. There ought to be millions of them.
Yeah.
You can't find it anymore.
Yeah, you thought you might have had a tree, but you can't find it.
How did it get from Earl Reichert's garage to the Hershey nursery? That's what I'd like to know.
It started up here.
Yeah, but how did Hershey get it?
Hershey was pretty widely traveled, and collected and knew something good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's still a garage. If you when you leave, it's Don's Small Engine Shop right here in the village, and it's would have been right next to that.
Doesn't sell gas though.
Yeah, it's still a garage. Best small engine mechanic I ever met.
There's to this day saw nothing that compares to it, and it would be a crime if it's lost to it.
Yeah, it's really a shame what's happened to the Hershey farm and all that material.
Yes.
So at his farm that him and his wife Elizabeth lived in.
There's some good things there. I had
until
grafted
67.
one of his hickory trees, and I called it the Hershey number 14. Really a great, equal to Granger, I would say. But I had a plant here and planted it out and died. I gave one to my friend Jack Ruddle. He planted one and it died, and they're extinct.
There's a farmhouse. So Hershey and his wife Elizabeth had the old farmhouse there, but there was another house, a tenant house, that was also on that farm.
Well, the barn was up by the road. It's the last thing you passed.
Yeah, I think it was a stone house that they had, and there was a barn behind that, right along the road. Mm-hmm. But then there was another tenant house, and it was yellow, and that's where John Kitch lived. And he was.
I haven't been there for 20 or 30 years, so I don't know what's going on down there.
Well, there's several years ago, I met the man who lives in that house now, and he was telling me about how he had spent all summer cutting down all the mulberries in the backyard because there was just a jungle of mulberries.
Yeah, it was in the barnyard there. Mm-hmm. It's you'd see it right from the road where you drove in there. Now, I've had different kinds of mulberries, and I've seen hundreds of mulberry trees. In my mind, there's nothing to compare to it.
But evidently, when they all lay on the ground, they come up.
I mean, so easy to propagate, but why would we have lost something like that?
So what do you remember about the Hershey nursery? Tell us about when you visited there and what you remember.
No, I remember you drove down the road in this direction, and there was a little lane that went in, and the first thing you came to was a barn like we have here with the mulberry tree. You know, you could almost see it from the car, and you'd park up there, and then the big field in the back was in Hershey trees. I think, I don't remember just how much was marked or anything. I know I was with Jack Ruddle. He wrote a magazine for the Rodale Press.
He was the editor of Organic Gardening.
And I think I had that tree already at that time, but for some reason I lost
He
it.
moved to Bethlehem.
They live in Bethlehem.
Jack has
That's a lead.
Parkinson's.
How often did you go to the John Hershey
One
nursery?
time.
Just once,
one time.
probably, because we were milking cows. He didn't go too much. I never was there. He was with Jack Ruddle, I guess.
Did you get scion wood or cuttings or seeds or anything when you were there?
I probably got cuttings.
That's so long ago.
As I see here on one of your maps, you have, this is in the nut grove across the creek. You have the Ulrich, so that's shellbark hickory. And here you have Pikeville, and you told me that tree you grafted from a tree that was out in Pikeville. And here's Hershey number 5. Mm-hmm. And then you have Please Hican next. And these are trees that I think maybe we could look at next year and try to find what these are. I'm not sure what Hershey number 5, was that a hickory?
The one from down there. In the barnyard was about 4 to 6 mulberry trees. Mm-hmm. And Hershey, the one I want is close to the road. And I think it should be in every nursery catalog. That was really a great tree, and it may have been lost.
Did you meet Hershey when you went to the nursery?
What's that?
Did you meet John Hershey when you were at the nursery?
No, I think that he had died previously to that. And actually, we knew his helper. Remember they used to come up here?
Ned Lapp,
Yeah.
who lived at Elverson, and we visited him several times.
Just to send plants
He worked for John.
to Europe, and he was in the business pretty big.
Where did you say he's from? Elverson?
Lived in Elverson,
Ned Lapp.
right along Route 23 in the Elverson area.
So that's if you go down 100 to Bucktown on 23, you turn
Take
west.
23, and when you get to Elverson, his house is up on the bank. Of course, he's dead now. I don't know who lives there now. But all these old guys are dead. Robert's the only one left.
There was a pennybacker. Pennybacker was one of Hershey's helpers back in the 20s and 30s, I think. But I think he stopped helping them with the farm right around World War II because his father wanted him to do some kind of machinist-related work, and so he basically shifted. He pivoted from horticulture.
Actually, we knew his helper, Ned Lapp, and they used to visit us at one time.
We visited them a couple times, too.
What?
We visited them a couple times. We went to them.
You also knew Miles Knoll, right?
Oh,
Yes.
Now, Miles Knoll was married to John Hershey's cousin.
Oh.
Oh.
According to an interview recorded by Rick Williams and Brian Caldwell in 1980.
That mulberry
Elizabeth
tree must
Hershey
be somewhere
mentions that.
with some nut worm still have that.
If John Hershey sold it out of his catalog, somebody still has it.
I would
Yeah,
hope
it's
so.
probably still somewhere.
How you find it?
And Miles Knoll had that shellbark
Maybe
longanecker.
they're listening to this.
Did you ever grow that one?
Which one?
Miles Knoll had a shellbark called longanecker.
I don't think I had it.
I assume it came from Lancaster County, because that's where he lived. He lived in...
You know, he used to sit in his basement all winter cracking nuts and had bags of nut meats that he would sell. I mean, that's a lot of work. If I'm cracking the nuts out, I'm eating them. I'm not going to give them or sell them. They're a lot of work. But he had them in bags, and I think he took some to the farm show, maybe.
I'm curious about the cultural history in this region of Pennsylvania and how nut culture or nut growing and other kinds of land-based relationships have been preserved. For example, in Pennsylvania Dutch culture, there's this idea of the Baumgarten, the forest garden, the woods garden. And then, of course, a lot of Mennonite folks have carried on some nut culturing.
I think the hickory nuts were so plentiful around here, the shagbark hickories, that they relied on those and had a favorite tree.
But it wasn't named.
No.
What's the Mennonite family that comes by the carload with kids that...
The Martins.
Marion Martin.
Yeah,
that's Martin's greenhouses near Narbonne.
They can pick nuts.
And they pick a lot of nuts.
So all their kids.
She has a good greenhouse business going there, Marion Martin.
They've come for years, and it's always been a good beneficial relationship because they bring their kids and pick buckets full of nut trees. And then they also bring lots of nut cakes and stuff for Robert and Cindy to try too. And
Marion brings Robert all kinds of plants. She brought him, what was it, salvias. She must have brought him at least 50 different varieties of salvias. And then I'm supposed to plant them all and keep them straight.
They have a tremendous amount of flowering plants.
All microphylla salvia.
Wow.
It's little.
But they sure appreciate nuts, so that's good.
Yeah.
When you moved into this farm, there was a long hedgerow of hazelnuts.
Yeah.
Most of them died out.
Yeah.
Do you remember? What do you remember about those?
No, they gave not quite as big a nut as the bought ones, but they were sizable nuts and worth picking, and we hated to lose them, but they just died out.
When you had your hazelnut grove back here with the picnic grove, were those named varieties or were those ones that you'd grafted? I mean, they were beautiful nuts, and
They
it was
all had a name tag.
beautiful picnic grove.
I think there were some named ones and some seedlings.
Well, when Emily and I got married, we got married by the spring up behind the greenhouse, and the reception, there was a beautiful filbert grove there, and all the trees grew up and had a canopy that was commingled at the top, and it was higher than a person stood. So in the middle of the summer, you could go into this picnic grove, and there were all these picnic tables in there, and the whole canopy at the top was all filberts, and it was beautiful. It was 8 or 10 picnic tables back there, so a really nice sized grove, and
it was cooler. If you went into the grove, it was
noticeably cool.
And we never had to mow the grass. It was shady enough that no grass grew, so we didn't have to mow under the picnic tables.
And they were prolific nut
had
trees
this beautiful
too.
canopy over it. And we had numerous weddings there.
Yeah.
And not only weddings, just picnics, and it was just a great picnic grove.
Is that where you have that Enos tree?
That what?
That Enos tree?
Yeah, that one's up on the hill further. They may have had that
So you're talking
cultivar.
about a lower grove.
Yeah, the lower grove was behind where the greenhouse is over here on this level.
Well, all the old filberts died of Eastern filbert blight.
Eastern velvet white wiped that out.
Suddenly wiped out the whole grove.
The squirrels are planting new ones. There's little hazelnut seedlings coming up all in the hedgerows
I don't know if they're
and inside your blueberry bushes. And
I don't know if they're all going to be susceptible to the Eastern filbert blight and die, but we have some that are not susceptible, that are hardy and that are bearing, but the nuts aren't as good. They're smaller. They're not as good as those old nuts we had in the old grove.
They were nice.
They were nice big nuts, and they were flavorful. And now the new ones, they're just little. They don't get nuts like they did in the old ones that all died of Eastern filbert blight. These are blight resistant, but the nuts aren't as good.
I wonder if they're the native ones.
I don't know.
Are there any particular books or journals or things like that that you found very helpful?
What do I have that's...
Michael Dern's book.
Hortus.
Yes, Hortus third.
Right, but he had the Encyclopedia of Horticultural Plants. He used to reference that
The
stuff.
New York Botanical Encyclopedia is very helpful, and the one we have is old, but we still use it. I have two of them, actually. I have one that probably was printed in the 40s that came from Janice Breininger's father. And then I have the newer one, which was probably printed in the 80s, maybe.
For years, anytime that you would stop at this house in the evening, Robert would be sitting at his desk over there in the corner, reading nursery catalogs, nursery books, plant books, every night. Isn't that, I mean...
And he reads them while he eats. He sits here and he gets food on him, and I'm always like,
Well, that and Farm Show magazine, I don't know if you're familiar with Farm Show, but it's filled with farmer ingenuity and, American farmers solving problems. And Robert always loved that magazine too, because it was just farmer technology, farmers making stuff in their shops to solve problems. And he'd often get real excited and show me something. Look what this guy did here. Look at how this worked. And that was kind of fun to see his enthusiasm. His shop over there is filled with tools that he made that were just task specific. There was a pair of pliers for stretching the brake springs on a 1964 Corvette, or I don't remember what kind of car that was, but yeah, it was a 64.
The kids called it the Beast.
Anyway, like he'd make tools when he couldn't find something that would work, and still probably remembers what all of them were for. So that's American farmer technology right there.
We did a lot of that, but now we don't do it anymore.
Well, it's because he's 94, but for years, give him a big hammer, a torch, and a sledgehammer, and he'll just make it
All
work.
kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
The last thing I made was the tables for the greenhouse.
Yeah.
Yes, all the tables over there, he made them.
Yeah.
So for a young person who wants to get into farming or tree crops or horticulture and nursery work or all of the above, what advice do you have?
I think you have to, first of all, you have to, it has to be an ingrained desire for you to do it.
Passion.
Yeah.
Got to be something you love.
Are you hopeful for tree crops to continue to grow? Do you think that in the future they'll play a bigger role in food systems?
I think the trees are really important. First of all, with the air. And there's nothing better to take the carbon out of the air.
All kinds of trees. And if you're going to have trees, you might as well have trees that produce something.
Right.
Yeah. Then you have to get people to want to eat it.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the problem with the pawpaws, of course.
Yeah.
They're great. People like pawpaws. They just don't market well because they don't store well. They don't ship well.
Well, they did a great thing at the farm show this year. They took all the nuts out there, and Scott was there with the nutcrackers and the kids. They're showing all these kids how to crack nuts.
That was
and what did that little boy say?
Well, it was funny. First of all, so what they did is they had an Ag Explorer program where there was a page with about 20 different booths on it, and the kids were encouraged to get a rubber stamp from each booth to show that they had been there. And then at the end of the day, if they had all 20 filled in, they could turn that in for a chance to win a laptop computer. So they came and they got to our table and they saw all the mechanical crackers and they just forgot all about the rubber stamp. And they're like, can we crack a nut? Actually, the one kid said, can I smash a nut? I think they just wanted to smash things. But so they used this mechanical cracker, and we had Granger hickory nuts, which has a pretty thin shell, and they would crack them, and they couldn't believe that with the mechanical advantage, even the younger girls, sometimes I'd have to tell them, okay, you got to slide your hands up higher on the handle so that you have more leverage. And a lot of them that were smart just did that on their own, which some didn't. Some would just pull right at the bottom, and the smart ones would always slide their hand up the top. But anyway, they'd crack these nuts. And I remember one kid meticulously removed all the hard shell. And he had a perfect hickory in his hand, a perfect half. And I said, how do you like that? And he looked at it and he said, I can eat that? So it was really funny. And then their parents were just so enthralled that their kids were doing something that was real world and not electric, and cracking nuts and eating them. And that was fun for the parents. And there was one young mother who had 3 kids in tow. And I asked if she had ever cracked nuts. And she got this kind of faraway look in her eyes. And she said, yeah, at Christmas every year we would get nuts in our stockings and we would all pour them into a bowl. And then at night we would sit around and crack nuts. And I could tell that it was a fond childhood memory. And I said, well, look at you, Mom. I said, here's all your kids. I said, they're all here cracking nuts. They're making great childhood memories. So it doesn't have to be Christmas to crack nuts. And you could just see the gears going. But we literally had about 100 kids a day. When you think, Zach, when you were there?
Yeah.
It was probably maybe easily 100.
It was popular.
Piles of kids. and many cracked their very first nut ever at the farm show. And it was funny, like I'd said earlier, to watch their reaction, because they would try these hickory nuts timidly and they weren't sure what to expect. And then as soon as the flavor would hit them and they'd realize this is really good, they'd all of a sudden go from having a blank expression to a smile. And their parents did the exact same thing when they tried them. And on one day, I had the kids trying black walnuts and hickories, and there were only about maybe 5 of 100 that preferred the black walnut. Most of them liked them okay. It's just a stronger flavor. It has a little more tannins, aftertaste. They almost all preferred the hickory. Whereas hickory nuts are harder to find in grocery stores than black walnut shells and chunks. So good flavors. It was really fun. You know, it was better than just mindlessly cracking nuts for me. You know, it was fun, and I don't know whether they're the future of nut growing or not, but you know what? We had a great display board in the back that had all the different kinds of nuts that are grown in Pennsylvania, including hicans and some that they'd never heard of, heart nuts, butternuts for that matter. Not many of them had heard of butternuts, and a lot of them were basically, we can grow all those nuts in Pennsylvania. So it was fun just trying to see, you know, what kind of gears you could get going and make them think, and pretty cool interaction. I'll do that again next year if I can. It was fun.
I think a lot of it's just experience, just creating opportunities for kids and people of all ages to experience these nuts, these trees, these fruits. I know when I got into nut trees and things like that, I made a comment to my mom one day, and she's like, oh yeah, when I was a kid, my dad would collect black walnuts and hickories, shellbark hickories, I found out later, and he would take them down in the basement and crack them with the vise one by one, and she would help him put them in a bucket. And then I found out later that the family had a grove of hickories in western Maryland, and they would go out there to wherever they were, and they would gather them up off the ground and take them home and store them and crack them. And you know, when we look into our histories and, you know, what our grandparents were doing and those before, appreciation for these things is there because the trees were there, right? Yeah. And you go back even further than that, and they were the Native Americans, and they did everything imaginable in deep relationship with all these trees.
Most young people now think it's too much trouble to crack nuts. They'll go to the grocery store and buy a bag of pecans already cracked.
Yeah, but they haven't tasted a shagbark hickory.
I saw a show on PBS one time, and it was talking, I think it was on PBS, but they were talking about the decline of the American chestnut, and it was so much more than just the lumber value. They were talking about how whole areas of Appalachia counted on the chestnuts to feed their hogs and fatten their hogs for winter, and how many Appalachian families collected chestnuts and then sold them every year so that they could get enough cash money so that they could buy new shoes to send their kids to school. It was much more than just the lumber. You know, those were an American staple. People survived on them. It was something that it was sustenance for people that didn't have access to Redner's and, you know, Piggly Wiggly and every other place, Winn-Dixie. You know, they couldn't just run to the grocery store and get food. So anyway, it was interesting, you know, how much nuts meant to a lot of our earlier ancestors. They really survival food for many families.
And I think moving forward into the future that these trees will play a similar role as the cost of food continues to go up and people start realizing that we have to do something differently. And that's where I think a lot of the work, keeping the genetics alive, even if we're not spreading these trees across the landscape, that they're still available, like you said with the mulberry, that as long as it still exists, people can go and propagate it later. And even if my generation, Zach's generation, it doesn't become more common, as long as we can keep that thread going. So at some point in the future, there is a generation that can kind of pick up from what we've left behind. And I think that's what a lot of this is all about, is making sure things aren't lost. And inevitably, some stuff will be lost. But the way I perceive my role with this project is to try to keep some of those threads alive, to make sure not as little as possible is lost. And the only way that happens is by sitting down at a table and talking about the importance of these things and how the trees in your backyard came to be, and how do we keep all of this knowledge available for the next generation. That's all our responsibility, is to make sure it gets passed down one more generation, and then what they do with it is on them, but we've done our part.
That's funny to hear you say that, because how is it that you, Emily, describe our generation and the nut growers as the bridge generation, right? And you say, why do you think that?
Well, yeah, the bridge. I mean, we know how many people were in the Nut Growers Association years past, and there's a lot of younger people now that are interested in just getting to the point in their lives where maybe they can acquire land, or they're identifying trees in public spaces that they have access to. And I feel like I'm bridging, those two time periods.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a seed bank, as long as you can keep the genetic diversity out there and keep it alive and kicking and identified, so that, some future generation at some point will be able to pick up the pieces, put it together again.
Yeah.
And there's still some nut culture, I guess, in Appalachia and some of the more rural and impoverished parts of the country. Parker Coble had a grove in Virginia outside Harrisonburg near the West Virginia line, and he would talk about people showing up because they noticed he had butternut and black walnut trees, and they would want the nuts for cracking and for food. And I mean, the nut growing industry is pretty young. I mean, it's in terms of human generations, 4 or 5 generations or so, but nobody even really knew how to graft a pecan tree until Antoine in 1846 or whatever. And before that, I mean, ever since that date, the last 150 years, the nut trees have been declining steadily on the landscape. And so I think it's up to us to reverse that trend.
I think the more we find out about the nutritional benefits of nuts, that'll help. I know, like, our son's studying the human microbiome and how it relates to human nutrition. And I think there's a lot to that we don't yet know. So I think the health benefits are another way that we're going to get the next generation interested and maybe help it get commercialized.
Yeah, and the challenge is the time span, right? Where you plant a tree, it's not like corn that you harvested that year. You're talking really 20 years from now.
Cold.
Before you're really getting any meaningful crops from it. And in a world where you're 18, 20 years old, you graduate high school, you go to college, you're 22 years old, you spend a couple of years figuring out kind of what you want to do, get the money to be able to do something. At 30 years old, maybe 35 years old, to say, hey, you're going to go plant this tree. It's going to be at its full production basically when you're ready to retire, is a tough sell. And how do we kind of change that narrative?
I think what Louise Bugby's doing in the Northampton County Park System is really important. She's having them plant excellent nut trees from Hershey's collection and putting it in a public space. So when I go out and teach people about nuts, I always say, you don't have to have land, you don't have to have time. You can go out and wild forage nuts right now, and maybe you can find some really good ones in public land. Always ask the landowner. But I think there's more and more people that are interested in that foraging or gleaning kind of activity, and as a group experience. So the community that's built around it is important to people too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that wraps up everything I wanted to talk about. Thank you all for joining me, inviting me, letting me see this beautiful place. It's a big ask to talk to someone online and say, hey, come see my farm and stay here. And it's been a really great opportunity. And obviously Zach as well for doing his part and kind of making sure all the pieces fit together. I'm excited to see this story exist out in the world and to remind people you can look online and see the history of John Hershey and J. Russell Smith and all these other names, but there are so many other people that were doing similar work, and those stories are important too. As many as we can catalog to pass on to the next generation, that's what we're here for. So thank you guys. Thank you all.
Well, it's been really fun to talk to you and tell you about our farm, what we do here.